I always thought I understood my wife. After 41 years of marriage, you'd reckon a bloke would know the woman sleeping next to him. I knew Eleanor took her tea with a splash of milk and exactly half a sugar. I knew she hummed old Slim Dusty songs when she was nervous. I knew she liked the bedroom window cracked open even in the depths of a Tasmanian winter, and I knew the soft, even rhythm of her breathing when she finally drifted off. I thought those small, familiar things added up to knowing her. I was wrong. What I knew was the surface, the parts she allowed me to see. Underneath, my wife had built another life entirely, and she had been building it for far longer than I could have imagined. My name is Geoffrey Whitlam. I'm 67 years old, retired from a career as a forensic accountant in Hobart, and until about 8 months ago, I believed I was a happy man. We had a comfortable weatherboard house overlooking the Derwent, 2 grown children who rang every Sunday, and a savings position that meant we'd never have to worry about a leaking roof or a dodgy car. I'd worked hard for that comfort. I'd traced money through corporate shells and offshore accounts for 35 years, untangling fraud for banks and insurance companies, and occasionally for the Australian Federal Police. I knew how money moved when people didn't want it found. What I never expected was that the very skills I'd spent my career building would one day be the only thing standing between me and complete ruin at the hands of the woman I'd promised to love forever. It started, as these things often do, with something so small, I almost missed it. A Tuesday morning in March, light rain on the tin roof, the kind of soft Hobart drizzle that makes you want to stay in bed. I was making us a cuppa when I noticed Eleanor's phone face down on the bench. She'd never done that before. Eleanor wasn't secretive about her phone. She'd leave it lying around in the lounge room, on the dining table, in the bathroom. But there it was, screen down, like someone had placed it deliberately. I didn't pick it up. I'm not the sort of man who snoops on his wife, but the image stayed with me through the morning, sitting at the back of my mind like a splinter you can feel but can't see. That afternoon, while she was at her Pilates class, I sat in my study with the rain coming harder against the window and tried to think clearly. There had been other small things. The credit card statement that arrived in November showing a charge from a hotel in Launceston on a weekend she'd told me she was visiting her sister in Devonport. The pharmacy receipt I'd found in the laundry for medication I knew she'd never been prescribed. The way she'd started locking the bathroom door, after 41 years of leaving it open for the dog to come and go. None of these things on their own meant anything. Together, they were a pattern. And patterns were what I'd spent my career recognizing. I rang my old mate Trevor that evening. Trevor had been my supervisor at the Federal Police Consultancy for 15 years before he'd retired 3 years ahead of me. He now spent his days fishing for trout at Great Lake and reading military history. When I told him what I was thinking, there was a long silence on the line. "Jeff," he said carefully, "before you do anything, before you confront her, before you even let her know you suspect anything, you need to ring my cousin Margaret. She's a family law solicitor in Sandy Bay. She's good. She's discreet. And mate, she's seen this story play out 100 times. Don't do anything stupid. Don't move money. Don't change passwords. Don't even change your routine. You ring Margaret first, and you do exactly what she tells you to do. Promise me." I promised. I rang Margaret the next morning from a cafe in Battery Point, and within an hour, I was sitting across from her in a small, quiet office that smelled faintly of jasmine tea and old books. She was a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, and she listened to my disorganized account of small details without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Mr. Whitlam, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If your suspicions are correct, the worst thing you can do right now is act on them emotionally. You've described a woman who is already taking deliberate, calculated steps to hide things from you. That tells me she has a plan. If you tip her off that you suspect her, she will accelerate that plan, and she will likely do it in ways that hurt you financially and legally. What you're going to do instead is gather evidence quietly, structure your assets defensively, and let her continue believing she has the upper hand until the day we decide otherwise. Can you do that? I told her I could. The forensic accountant in me appreciated the strategy. The husband in me wanted to drive home, walk into the kitchen, and simply ask Eleanor whether she still loved me. Margaret saw the conflict on my face, and her voice softened. Geoffrey, I know this is the hardest thing you've ever done, but the woman you want to ask that question to may not be the woman who's actually in your house anymore. Don't give her the chance to lie to your face. Give yourself the chance to know the truth. Over the next 3 weeks, I followed Margaret's instructions to the letter. I quietly opened new accounts at a different bank entirely. One Eleanor had no signature on and no knowledge of. I didn't move any money yet. That would come later. Margaret arranged for a private investigator, a former Tasmania police detective named Russell, who specialized in matrimonial work. I gave Russell photographs of Eleanor, her car registration, her usual schedule, and the names of the friends she claimed to spend time with. I asked him to find out, simply and conclusively, whether my wife was being unfaithful, and if so, with whom. The answer came back 9 days later. Russell sat across from me at Margaret's office with a manila folder he placed gently on the table, the way a doctor might set down test results. The man's name was Bradley Henderson. He was 53 years old, divorced, the owner of a small chain of caravan parks scattered between Hobart and the East Coast. He and Eleanor had been seeing each other for, by Russell's careful estimate, at least 2 years, and possibly closer to 4. They met most Tuesday afternoons at his flat in Sandy Bay. The same afternoons Eleanor told me she was at Pilates. They'd taken weekends together at coastal towns I'd never heard her mention. They'd been to Melbourne for a long weekend the previous October. The same weekend, Eleanor had told me she was nursing a sick aunt in Burnie. I looked at the photographs. Eleanor laughing in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in years. Eleanor holding hands with this stranger as they walked along a beach near Beacheno. Eleanor kissing him outside a wine bar with the kind of openness people reserve for places where they feel completely safe from being seen. The wife I had known for 4 decades, comfortable and giggling and unburdened, in the company of a man whose existence I'd never even suspected. I closed the folder. I expected to feel rage, but what I felt instead was a strange, hollow stillness, like the moment after you drop a glass and before it hits the tiles. Margaret poured me a glass of water and waited. Right, I said eventually. What do we do now? Now, Margaret said. We wait. Because this isn't just an affair, Geoffrey. From what Russell has told me, and from what you've told me about her behavior, I don't believe she's planning to leave you. I think she's planning something else. And before we move, I want to understand exactly what that is. We didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Eleanor came home from her Tuesday Pilates class, carrying a small paper bag from the chemist. She left it on the kitchen bench while she went to change, and I had a quiet look. Inside was a packet of magnetic strip card readers and a small device I recognized immediately because I'd used similar tools in my own work years before. It was a phone cloning kit, the sort of equipment used to copy data from one mobile to another without the original owner ever knowing. My stomach turned cold. Eleanor wasn't planning to leave me. She was planning to rob me, and she wanted access to my phone to do it. That night, I lay in bed beside her and listened to her breathing and felt the weight of 41 years pressing down on me. I had loved this woman. I had stood beside her in the small Anglican church in Bellerive when we were both 26, and I had meant every word I said. I had held her hand when our daughter was born, and again when our son was born, and I had nursed her through pneumonia in 1998 when the doctors weren't sure she'd make it through the night. And now she was lying next to me, planning to take everything I had built and walk away with another man. The next morning, I rang Margaret and told her what I'd found. Her response was crisp and immediate. "Right. We move today. Come to my office at 11. Bring nothing from the house. We'll start the asset protection process now." What followed over the next month was, I'll admit, the most intricate piece of financial work I'd ever been involved in, and I'd been involved in some complicated ones. Margaret guided the legal side. I handled the technical side. Together, we constructed what was essentially a financial trap, designed not to harm Eleanor, but to ensure that when she did make her move, she would find herself reaching for nothing. We started with the joint accounts. I didn't drain them, because Margaret was clear that any large, sudden movement would either spook Eleanor or, worse, give her ammunition to claim I'd acted in bad faith during property settlement. Instead, we left the joint accounts at their normal balances, around $42,000 between current and savings, and I quietly began moving the bulk of our liquid assets into a structured trust that Margaret had set up in my sole name. The trust had been established as a legitimate retirement vehicle months before any of this had begun. Margaret had backdated nothing. It simply meant that the bulk of our wealth, around $890,000 in cash, shares, and term deposits, was held in an instrument that Eleanor had no signing rights over and no immediate ability to access. Then we set the bait. I knew Eleanor would eventually try to clone or compromise my phone. I knew, because I'd seen the kit in her chemist bag, that she believed accessing my phone would give her the keys to our financial kingdom. So I gave her exactly what she expected to find. I created a second profile on my phone, a kind of decoy environment that mirrored my real banking apps almost perfectly. The accounts visible in this decoy environment showed our joint balance and 3 other accounts I had named to look like investment portfolios, with apparent balances totaling $480,000. None of those accounts actually held that money. They were genuine accounts, properly registered in my name, but they functioned as honeypot accounts. The real funds had already been moved. Anyone who accessed them through my phone would see large balances, would believe those balances were real, and would, if they tried to transfer the money out, find themselves immediately flagged and tracked by both my bank's internal fraud team and by a separate monitoring arrangement Margaret had set up through a forensic IT specialist in Melbourne. It took Eleanor 11 days to make her move. I'd been pretending to sleep heavily, snoring a bit louder than usual, going to bed earlier and deeper into the wine than my normal 1 glass. On a Wednesday night in early May, I felt the mattress shift just after midnight. Eleanor was getting up. I kept my breathing slow and even. Through half-closed eyes, I watched her pick up my phone from the bedside table and carry it out of the room. She was gone for nearly 40 minutes. When she came back, she returned the phone exactly where it had been, slipped under the doona beside me, and within minutes was breathing as evenly as if she'd been there all night. The next morning, I rang the IT specialist in Melbourne. He confirmed what I already suspected. Software had been installed on my phone overnight. A sophisticated piece of spyware designed to mirror my banking activity, capture passwords, and provide remote access to anyone with the corresponding key. He left it in place, as we'd agreed. From that moment on, every keystroke Eleanor's accomplice could see was a keystroke we wanted them to see. For 3 weeks after that, I went about my life as if nothing had changed. I made Eleanor her tea in the mornings. I drove her to the airport on a Friday evening when she told me she was flying to Sydney for a 4-day yoga retreat with 2 friends from Bellarive. I kissed her cheek as she went through to security. I told her I'd miss her. I drove home in the soft autumn dusk along the Tasman Bridge, looking at the lights of the city reflected in the river, and I thought about how much I had loved this woman, and how completely she had stopped existing somewhere along the way without my ever noticing. The retreat was in Noosa, not Sydney. Russell had confirmed that within the first hour of her flight landing, Bradley Henderson met her at Brisbane Airport in a hired Mercedes. They drove up to a beachfront resort where they had booked a one-bedroom suite at $1,200 a night. Over the 4 days she was away, Eleanor made 47 separate transactions through the spyware on my phone, attempting to transfer money from the decoy accounts into a series of intermediary accounts and finally into a joint account she and Bradley had opened together at a credit union in Brisbane. The total she attempted to move was $440,000. Every single transaction was visible to me in real time, displayed on the laptop in my study. Every transaction was processed in a way that appeared, on her end, to be successful. The joint account in Brisbane showed the deposits arriving. Bradley and Eleanor watched the balance climb together over 4 days of champagne breakfasts and afternoon massages and long, expensive dinners. What they did not know was that none of that money had ever actually moved. The transfers were being routed through a managed environment that simulated the appearance of completion, while actually holding every dollar in escrow with my bank's fraud team. The Brisbane Credit Union account had been frozen with the bank's full cooperation within 20 minutes of the first deposit. The balance they were seeing was a number on a screen, nothing more. On the Sunday she was due back, I drove to the airport to pick her up. I'd thought about not going. I'd thought about sending a taxi with a letter, the way some men might, but I wanted to see her face. I wanted to look at her one more time, in the full knowledge of what she'd done, before everything changed. I wanted her to remember, for the rest of her life, that the man who came to collect her at the gate that evening was the man she had tried to destroy. She came through the arrival doors looking radiant, tanned, relaxed, wearing a sundress I hadn't seen before. She kissed me on the cheek and squeezed my arm and told me how restorative the retreat had been, how clear-headed she felt. In the car on the way home, she chatted about yoga poses and the smoothies they'd had for breakfast. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me with a small, strange smile. "Geoffrey, love, I want you to know something. I've been thinking a lot this weekend, about us, about our life. And I think you should know that I've decided to leave you." I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I looked straight ahead at the closed garage door. "Right," I said. "I've met someone else," she said. Her voice had a quality I'd never heard before, a kind of triumphant lightness. "I've actually been with him for a while, and I want you to know, before you find out any other way, that I've already moved the money. All of it. Your accounts, the investments, the lot. By the time you check your bank balance in the morning, you'll find the joint account has about $40,000 left, and that's all you'll have. I wanted to tell you this myself, Geoffrey, because after 41 years, I felt you deserved to hear it from me directly. I really did enjoy spending your money, by the way. The suite was magnificent." I looked at her then, properly, for the first time in years. There was no shame in her face, no flicker of the woman I'd married. She looked, if anything, pleased with herself. She had been waiting a long time to deliver this speech. I let her finish. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thin envelope, which I handed to her without a word. She frowned and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a printout from the Brisbane Credit Union, showing the current balance of the joint account she'd opened with Bradley Henderson. The balance read $0. Below that was a printout showing the $440,000 she believed she had transferred, sitting safely in escrow with my bank's fraud unit, flagged as suspected fraudulent transactions, originating from spyware installed on a phone in a private residence in Hobart on the night of May the 3rd. Below that was a copy of the police report Margaret had filed on my behalf 2 days earlier, naming both Eleanor Whitlam and Bradley Henderson as suspects in a coordinated financial fraud. And below that was a copy of the divorce petition Margaret had lodged that morning at the Family Court of Australia. Eleanor read each page. The color drained from her face slowly, the way water drains from a basin. By the time she reached the divorce petition, her hands were shaking. "Geoffrey," she said. "Geoffrey, please. I can explain. This isn't— I'd like you to get out of the car now," I said quietly. "Your suitcase is in the boot. There's a taxi waiting for you at the end of the street. It will take you wherever you'd like to go. Your solicitor, when you find one, can contact Margaret Donovan at Donovan and Associates in Sandy Bay. Margaret has already prepared the property settlement documents. You will find that, under Tasmanian law, given your documented attempt to fraudulently transfer marital and non-marital assets, your entitlement is going to be considerably less than you may have been counting on. The police, I should mention, will probably want to speak to both you and Mr. Henderson sometime in the next few days. I'd suggest you get yourself a good criminal solicitor, as well as a family one. Now please, get out." She got out. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She walked down the driveway with her wheeled suitcase rattling behind her, and she didn't look back. I watched her in the rearview mirror until she disappeared around the corner where the taxi was waiting. Then I sat in the car for a long time with my hands on the wheel and my eyes closed, and I cried. For the first time in maybe 20 years. Not for what I had lost that night, but for what I had lost slowly, over years, without ever knowing it was being taken. The legal aftermath was straightforward, though it dragged on for months in the way these things do. Eleanor and Bradley were charged with attempted fraud, attempted theft as a servant, and unauthorized access to a computer system. Bradley pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and gave evidence against Eleanor. He received an 18-month suspended sentence. Eleanor, who fought the charges, was convicted at trial and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 9 months. She served her time at the Mary Hutchinson Women's Prison at Risdon Vale, less than 15 kilometers from the home we'd shared. I never visited. The divorce was settled within a year. Because the fraud attempt was so clearly documented, Margaret was able to argue successfully that Eleanor's behavior amounted to financial misconduct of the highest order, and the property settlement reflected that. Eleanor walked away with around $80,000, her car, and her personal belongings. The house, the trust, the investments, and the bulk of our life together remained with me. Our children took it harder than I'd expected. My daughter Caroline, who lives in Melbourne with her own family, was furious with Eleanor and protective of me to a degree I found almost embarrassing. My son Nicholas, who lives in Brisbane, was quieter about it, but he flew down twice in the first 3 months just to sit on the veranda with me and drink a few beers and not talk much. They are good kids. They were the only thing Eleanor and I built together that turned out to be exactly what it appeared to be. I'm 67 now. As I said at the start, I sold the house in Hobart 8 months after the divorce was finalized. There were too many ghosts in those rooms. I bought a smaller place in Cygnet, down in the Huon Valley, where I have a small orchard of apple trees and a view of the river and far fewer reminders of the life I used to have. I read more than I ever did. I've taken up woodworking badly. I see Trevor most weekends for fishing or a meal. I ring my children every Sunday now, instead of waiting for them to ring me. I want to tell you something, if you've stayed with me this far, because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. I am not bitter. I want you to know that. I lost 41 years of my life to a marriage that turned out to be something other than what I thought it was, and I will never get those years back. But I am not bitter, because bitterness would be letting Eleanor take something else from me, and she has taken enough. What I learned, and what I want anyone listening to take from this, is this. If something feels wrong in your marriage, trust that feeling, but do not act on it alone. Get advice. Speak to a solicitor, quietly and confidentially, before you confront anyone. Do not move money in a panic. Do not change passwords without legal guidance. Do not threaten. Do not accuse. Do not give the other person time to prepare against you. Information is power, and in a situation where someone you love may be planning to harm you, the only way to protect yourself is to know more than they think you know, while letting them believe you know nothing. I learned that the law in Australia is, on the whole, fair to people who have been wronged, but only if they can document the wronging. Suspicion is not enough. Tears are not enough. Decades of marriage are not enough. What protects you is paperwork, evidence, and the patience to gather both before you make your move. I learned that the people who love you genuinely will show up at your worst moments without being asked. Trevor drove 3 hours each way to sit with me the night Eleanor was sentenced. And he said almost nothing the entire evening. And it was exactly what I needed. Caroline rang me every single morning for 6 weeks after the divorce. Nicholas sent me a parcel of books on woodworking with a note that just said, "Something for the hands, Dad. The mind will follow." These are the people I should have been investing in all along. Instead of pouring myself into a relationship that was, I now believe, never quite what I imagined it was. And I learned, perhaps most importantly, that you can lose almost everything you thought defined you, and still wake up the next morning and find that the sun is still rising over the Huon River, and the apple trees still need pruning, and the kettle still boils for a cuppa. The shape of your life can change completely, and you can still be in it, and you can still find that it is, in its own quieter way, a good life. Eleanor sent me a letter from prison after about 6 months. I didn't open it. I put it in a drawer and left it there for nearly a year. When I finally read it, on a wet Sunday afternoon in Signet, with the wind coming off the river, it was full of explanations and justifications and a kind of half-apology that wasn't really an apology at all. I read it once, and then I burned it in the fireplace, not out of anger, but because I no longer had any use for it. There was nothing she could tell me that would change what had happened, and there was nothing I needed from her anymore. That, more than anything, was the moment I knew I was free. I'm telling you this story, friend, because I know there are people listening who have a small splinter at the back of their mind right now. Maybe it's a phone left face down on the bench. Maybe it's a receipt that doesn't add up. Maybe it's a feeling. Nothing more. That the person beside you has become a stranger and you're not sure when it happened. If you're that person, please, please don't ignore it. Get advice. Talk to a professional. Move quietly and carefully. The people who would harm you are counting on your loyalty, your love, and your reluctance to believe the worst. Don't give them that gift. You owe it to yourself and to the years of your life still to come, to know the truth, whatever it turns out to be. My name is Geoffrey Whitlam. I am 67 years old. I live in a small house in the Huon Valley, with a view of the river and a kettle that's always on. I lost a wife I thought I knew, and I found a self I thought I'd forgotten. I'm telling you my story because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. If that's you, take care of yourself. And remember, the truth, however hard, is always better than the lie that lets you keep losing.